China's new energy passenger vehicle market experiencing significant growth in 2024 with double-digit increases in production, sales and exports.
European auto giant Stellantis and CATL, one of China's largest EV battery makers, are joining forces.
Electric vehicles have become a defining force in China's manufacturing success and a key driver of its global technology exports. As the industry evolves, China continues to push the boundaries of innovation, solidifying its position as a leader in the EV revolution. With the country's biggest annual political event in full swing, the future of the EV sector is a major talking point among policymakers and industry leaders. What strategies are shaping China's next phase of growth, and how do these developments align with Europe's ambitions for a greener future? In this episode of Deep Dive, I'm joined by CGTN Europe correspondent Jen Copestake, who brings first-hand insights from the ongoing two sessions. Together, we'll explore the shared goals driving collaboration between Chinese and European automakers and what this means for the future of global mobility. It's Thursday, March the 6th. So Jen, I learned that you got a chance to visit factory of Chinese EVs in Guangzhou, and how did it feel like to get a peek of how these Chinese EVs are made from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, it was really incredible because we went to the GAC Ion factory in Guangzhou. And at the time when I arrived there, I didn't actually realize that this was one of the lighthouse factories. And I think it's one of the most significant EV factories potentially in China, maybe even in the world, as far as their terms of how they're incorporating, digital technology, sort of automation, high-tech advancements, and also green technology. I think the roof of this place had, gosh, I don't know, was it 80,000 square meters, over 80,000 square meters of solar panels that are providing up to 15% of the electricity of the plant, which is really incredible. And I think what strikes me, it's the second Chinese manufacturing plant I've seen for electric vehicles. The first one was Leapmotor's factory in Jinhua, which also was very nice. I mean, these are beautiful factories, very quiet, clean, and so impressive to see these cars coming off the manufacturing line, the production line, so quickly. I think the GAC Ion factory, the finishing process for the car is something like 53 seconds. And they have this flexible production line so that they can manufacture different types of car on the same line. And I think they said there was something like 100,000 different selections that the customer could make for each car using 20 different criteria. There's over 100 colors that could make. So we saw all different colors of cars, all different sizes. It was incredible. And I think watching how some of the robots were putting in, I think me and my cameraman stood for 10, 15 minutes watching these seats being put into the car. There didn't seem to be any human involvement at all. They just kind of clipped into place, and the chassis of the car had the battery in there. So I think watching how the companies have these incredible complexes, it's not just the production line. They have the R&D center on site. They're developing advanced battery technology right there that can then be just kind of delivered into the production line to the cars directly. That Guangzhou is a port city, so the cars can be delivered, I guess, all over China, all over the world very quickly. The whole supply chain and the industry chain is just packed so tightly together that it's very efficient, and it's something that I had never seen before, and it's always unexpected, like coming to China to see how these factories are running. And I think that factory can run 20 hours a day. They have break times for the workers and things like that, of course. But no, it's absolutely fascinating, and to be in that one of the lighthouse factories was a real experience to see just the energy, the green energy. They have on site also partnerships with other companies, so they have battery recycling on the site as well, which was really, really incredible to see it.
Yeah, the views in the factory already sound so interesting that they might be able to consider making tourism out of a factory visit. Yeah,
I think you're right. Yeah, because one other thing that we tried there, so they have a showroom with the different cars, the GAC Ion cars, and Ion is the electric brand of GAC, which is more of a legacy car maker in China, and I suppose, and been operating for 30 years. But Ion also has this supercar that we got to drive in that I think goes from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 1.9 seconds. The test track was really wet on that day, so we didn't actually get to do that, but which I was kind of happy about because I was a little bit scared. But it
Right.
also has cars that have autonomous driving capabilities, so that you can take those out for a test drive on the road on the actual highway with autonomous driving. So yeah, I think tourism there could be a really good thing, but also just for other manufacturers around the world, and particularly with European legacy car brands, maybe to come and see that, to see how
Hmm.
the production process works,
Yeah.
and think about the model for their factories. Because I think GAC and Ion is going to, we spoke to their head of marketing, who was telling us that this is something that they want to export. It's not just to keep here in China, but to export to the rest of the world. There's a factory in Southeast Asia, and they're planning to open one in Europe as far as their plans go.
Hmm.
They're looking for a site in Europe this year.
I believe that's been taking place over the years already. And just so
Mm.
fascinating, like in the past, people might go to nature to watch an actual waterfall, and now you can watch a waterfall of car parts being assembled
Yeah,
together on an assembly line in a factory.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually it's very interesting and a beautiful thing to see, because it's also the way that the waste and some of the efficiencies that are there are, it's mesmerizing in a way. Like you could watch it.
Mm.
It's quite hypnotic to see how it's all coming together, and the use of there's little robots, autonomous robots that drive around delivering parts to different stations, and everything's
Mm.
connected digitally, so that it has the highest degrees of efficiency.
Yeah.
So I think it's, yeah, well worth a visit for tourism, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, so currently we are having the annual meetings of China's National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, where the major policies, laws, and economic plans are discussed and approved. So, with China's two sessions underway, are you focusing particularly on the EV discussions at this year's two sessions? And have there been any topics that stood out to you?
I mean, yeah, definitely focusing on some of the numbers that have come out about the EVs. We heard about, 13 million electric vehicles, NEVs, new electric vehicles being purchased from China for the first time. I think what's been fascinating is also the discussions on artificial intelligence, because, of course, artificial intelligence will touch into the
Hmm.
EV space. But we've been visiting also robotics companies in Shenzhen, like Engine AI, and looking at their humanoid robot that's been walking around town. And, they're selling this robot for 15,000 US dollars. I'm about 5'3", so it's this one that is a bit smaller than other models that they have and that they're developing, that are about 6 feet tall. But it's just quite remarkable, because this artificial intelligence, all the breakthroughs that are happening in China with DeepSeek, and it seems to be exploding. And that's also been a focus on the two sessions, and rightfully so. And I think for me, it's just learning more about what will happen ethically as well, and in regulatory frameworks from China's perspective, and where that's going to fit into discussions with other companies around the world and other countries around the world.
Hmm.
I mean, before I worked in CGTN, I actually spent some time working. Well, one, I was a technology correspondent at the BBC, but after that, I also worked in the Vatican, which is a very different
Hmm.
kind of environment as far as the discussions on AI. But they're very open to speaking about artificial intelligence and how it fits in
Hmm.
to the concept of the soul. And I think talking to some of these Chinese roboticists, it was just fascinating hearing about how they're hoping to maybe incorporate general AI into their humanoid robots in the next 2 or 3 years, and the implications that that could have with humanity is just really fascinating. And China's really at the heart of these discussions. And I think hearing about that, the support for young entrepreneurs, the support for the private sector and the tech sector in the two sessions, and in the work report, to me is really key. And I think the world needs to get involved and pay attention to these developments here in China, and
Hmm.
really work together on what are going to be fundamental changes in humanity. And I think it's also fascinating. This hasn't really been discussed, but yeah, that I've heard. But thinking about the future of work, I was lucky to chair a panel a few years ago at the World Economic Forum in Tianjin about the future of work and about what would happen if we reached kind of 50% unemployment one day. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but just interesting to hear about, what do we do for urban unemployment and employment opportunities, for youth employment, and how do we sort of look at society and how AI is going to fit into the way that we work and how it's going to enhance our work, how it's going to help us, but also where it may create some difficulties in employment. But that's some key areas that I'm listening out for.
Yeah, with the progress of automation and the artificial intelligence, that's definitely one topic to be concerned about. But on top of applying these technologies onto their electric vehicles, the Chinese EV companies, they have been expanding their presence in worldwide and also definitely in the European market. And how do you think Chinese EVs are perceived in Europe in terms of their quality, the technology they apply, and especially the brand values compared to their European counterparts that are made locally in Europe?
I think it's really changing a lot. And I think one thing I'll tell you is I remember maybe 8 months ago, I was in a taxi and an Uber in London. And I had this discussion with a driver who's telling me, I was saying that I'm about to make a documentary about electric vehicles in China. And I was talking about BYD and he was talking about BYD. And he didn't know that's a Chinese company. He was just saying how brilliant they are. And I said, oh, yeah, that's the company. He's like, that's a Chinese company. And he's like, no, it's not a Chinese company. I was like, I promise you, this is a Chinese company. And it took some convincing. I had to actually show him on the internet and go to the company's website. And he was really blown away.
You changed
and
his worldview.
I changed his worldview. Yeah, no, which is good. And I think the cars I've been very lucky to test drive quite a few Chinese EVs now. And I worked with, I test drove particularly Leapmotor, their new SUV, and then they also have a smaller car that they were kind of marketing to Europe, and that was in Italy. So I got to take both of these cars for a good 2 or 3 hours each around the Lake Maggiore and Lake Como area in northern Italy. And it's a real eye-opening experience for me. It was my first time actually driving an electric car, full stop. And two, just to experience some of the features, the more luxurious kind of quality inside the cars. It was, for me, it was really eye-opening. And you realize the price comparison point versus some of the other electric cars on the market in Europe. It's extremely competitive and for what you get for the money. And then it was fascinating going to Hangzhou, and I got to test drive a Leapmotor, a smaller car that was the same kind of as the one in Europe, but it was more targeted to the Chinese market. And that there was just even some more differences there and more luxurious kind of elements and customizations that were available here for the Chinese market. And I think that the cars being built around the battery technology, like having companies that have grown up from being battery manufacturers or specializing in that kind of technology, just leaves so much scope for the design of the car to be really customizable. I mean, I've seen cars that make full beds, full camping kind of situations. We got to go to Xpeng and see, one of their vehicles that, for lack of a better description, looks like similar to a Tesla kind of Cybertruck design. But in the back, you have a full quadricopter, like that you can fly out of your car, which is an incredible concept. And I got to try that like in a simulator scenario, because when I was covering technology before, specifically technology, I used to look at this company all the time and how they were evolving with this particular product, and I just never thought that was a feasible product to get off the ground, pardon the pun, but it was just like, it was to see it in person. And I really saw now actually a use case scenario, because they were talking about using this for flights, kind of pleasure flights around maybe canyons or scenic areas in China. And I could really see that could be a really good use case and a really fun thing to do and a safe thing to do, because I was worried maybe about safety, but this low altitude economy also, which has come up in the two sessions, and is really also something that China is ahead, as far as I know, in the world in this area. They're developing this area and successfully. Even people in London are asking me about drone deliveries and does that really exist? And getting a coffee delivered by drone and, all this sort of stuff that you can't really imagine. And then it's happening. So I really fully believe that people will be flying these machines out of their cars one day and going for a pleasure flight and coming back to it feels much safer and more realistic than I ever thought possible.
Yeah, it does sound a bit concerning, flying a car, low altitude economy, and just urban
Yeah.
transportation.
Yeah, but I think they're going to have a lot of regulation, hopefully, to keep people away from each other. I don't know how that's going to work,
Right.
but yeah, it is somewhat concerning, but also I guess that's where the artificial intelligence will also come in with some of the autonomous systems for these cars and for the also any kind of flying vehicle.
Do you think the Chinese EV makers, when they enter the European market, do they think they are tailoring their strategy, their car design to the unique and different consumer preferences in the European market?
I think so, because I think Leap Motor, for example, I don't think they're tailoring the SUV particularly necessarily to certain parts of Europe. They're looking more at the smaller city cars, which both cars were very maneuverable even in the mountains in northern Italy. I have to say, even the bigger SUV, but the small car, I mean, it was really easy to drive, really maneuverable on the roads, very quick and very easy to get around. And I think that's a good strategy. I mean, I think we spoke to, people from places like Mercedes and Volkswagen when we were in Germany filming. And I think for them, they are also welcoming Chinese electric vehicles. There is some disconnect on the tariff situation with Europe because I think some legacy car makers see now the Chinese car makers as something that they want to compete with, and they want to have that opportunity to also improve themselves by looking at the design of some of these Chinese electric cars. And I think they also think it's not necessarily fair to have the tariff situation. They'd rather try and compete and catch up with what Chinese car brands are producing, which I found really interesting. And as far as we were asking about like people's perceptions of the cars, and I know in the UK, I've spoke to quite a few people we went to an electric car show in Farnborough, which is an airfield, and people were saying they also want the opportunity to have these different brands and experience Chinese EVs in the UK. So yeah, so I think people are very excited about it, and it would be nice to be able to buy. I mean, some of the cars, I think one of the executives from Ford said he had a Xiaomi car in America for 6 months and that he really loved driving it. I don't know how he got it or how he got it there, but I think these legacy car makers from America and Europe are really looking now to the Chinese EV market and want to learn as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's some stories about Tesla being kind of this highlight for some executives here in China and originally, and now China's probably surpassing what Tesla can produce in a way. And I think those North American and European brands now are looking at China to try and up their game. So
Yeah.
it's a healthy, competitive market potentially.
Yeah, the learning is definitely a mutual way.
Mm.
But as Chinese car makers expand their presence in the European market, there's definitely going to be more pressure on the legacy brands, as you put it, when they see the Chinese automakers bring in these fancier features at a lower cost. Like, how do you think the European automakers, how are they dealing with this growing presence of Chinese cars in the EU market?
I mean, that's the question. I think it's going to be challenging. And some people even said that maybe we'll see in the next few years some of those car companies disappear. And it's, not a nice thing to think about.
I think we already seen a part of that process as there's been mergers and acquisitions between several major car companies.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's just difficult, like coming back to those factories in Guangzhou and around the country in Jinhua, and it's hard to imagine how they will compete with the Chinese system because the supply chain in China, I think the battery technology and everything is just so well integrated. And in Europe, I don't think we have quite the same level of integration as far as, even access to raw materials and the battery technology. We would have to probably work with China. And I think that's what Elite Motor is partnering with Stellantis in Europe. And I think if it's possible, we would see more partnerships like that. Like Ford, for example, I know was kind of trying to get a partnership with CATL, the battery manufacturer here in China. And I don't know where that's going with the current situation in the US. But it doesn't seem like there's going to be any other way except for companies to work together with some of the Chinese brands now to learn, to share technology, to make joint ventures, and to improve their technology alongside what's happening here in China.
Chinese car brands have received quite different reactions from the policymakers and car companies in Europe. As we have seen the tariffs from the policymakers, but at the same time, the car makers, they are establishing partnerships, collaboration with the Chinese automakers. For example, the ones between Volkswagen and Xpeng Motors, BMW and Great Wall Motor. And do you think there are some common goals or challenges that are bringing these car companies together despite perhaps more hostile attitude from the policymakers?
No, I think so. I think they're just being realistic. Like, I think they need to work together, or or they just can't compete. So it's, to me, it's
to
completely
survive in
realistic.
this market.
Yeah, and I think and China has just gone ahead on so many different aspects of the technology and the designs and the way that the manufacturing is done, even the green sides of things and green manufacturing, and you just can't compete, I don't think, unless you, and I think the best thing to do at the moment is to cooperate. And the companies that are doing that, I think, are being realistic and more understanding of what's actually going on. And like I said, in Germany, there's some companies that don't support the tariff situation. And in the UK, I don't think the UK is imposing very strong tariffs on Chinese EVs. I think maybe it's 10%. But it's because, yeah, I just think this is a time for cooperation and being a bit more realistic about it.
Now, coming back to China's two sessions, the political season that will have an impact on China's EV sector as well as many more high-tech industries. Just wondering, Jen, have you got a chance to, ask a question to one of the lawmakers?
No, not yet, and I wish I did. I think
That's great, because
I think
that takes us right to this question that I have for you. So hypothetically, if you have this opportunity to ask a question at a press conference or just privately to one of the lawmakers, what question would you have for that person and why?
so. I think I would want to ask more about China's role in the world as far as how do they see themselves in the world, the lawmakers here, as a leader in artificial intelligence. I mean, they've now proven that in a way to the world, and how will they work together with other countries in this area of regulation and the future of work, the future of what it means to be human almost in artificial intelligence. Maybe it's kind of a strange question. I don't know if they would answer that, but I think I would love to hear much more about how China is positioning itself as a leader in artificial intelligence in the world as far as regulation, ethical guidance, which they have touched on a bit, and how they would work with other countries and what that would look like, and what their plans are for the future of artificial intelligence, and and do they see themselves as leading those discussions now, or just or being one of the key partners at the table, or truly a leader on the ethical framework for artificial intelligence?
If unfortunately you don't get a chance to ask that question, I'm sure
I don't think that will.
I'm sure one of the lawmakers, or some of them, might be listening to this podcast, and if they found out and heard this question from
I'd love to
Jen,
talk to them.
please reach out back to CGTN Radio, and we'll help you connect with
That'd
Jen
be wonderful.
Copestake.
Thank you. CGTN Europe would love to have an interview, definitely. And just learn more. Thank you ever so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you, Yunjin.
Yeah, really, really nice speaking with you, Jen, and really appreciate you taking your time from your busy schedule at reporting the two sessions and record this episode with us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Last year, as the world's largest car exporter, China shipped a record 6.41 million vehicles overseas, with over a quarter of them electric. From breakthroughs in autonomous driving to cutting-edge battery technology, Chinese EVs are not only setting new industry standards, but also playing a pivotal role in the global energy transition. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Deep Dive. If you enjoyed what you just heard, don't forget to follow us on your podcast platforms. Just search for Deep Dive. You can also leave a comment to let us know what you want to learn about China and beyond. This episode is brought to you by me, Li Yingqi, and my colleagues Zhang Zhang and Qi Zhi. Special thanks to CGTN Europe correspondent Jen Copestake. I'll see you in the next one.